everybody. This is another episode of the Exodus Project. I'm your host, Steve Eisenhower, and I'm joined with my good friends Hillel and Yossi. How are you guys doing today?
Doing great.
Doing
Nice to
well.
see you, Steve.
Likewise, likewise. This will be another long form roundtable discussion, as we had mentioned last time. And this time we will be discussing the ever looming topic of the Septuagint. We'll be getting into history, some differences between the Christian Bible, the Septuagint, and the Hebrew Bible, and really just deconstruct the whole thing at its core. And yeah, I think it'll be quite informative and kind of break those Christian paradigms of, well, the New Testament is just from a more reliable text of the Septuagint rather than the Hebrew Bible we have today. But before we get started, hit that subscribe button, turn on the notifications, give us a big thumbs up, and please check the description for any literary resource you may need. They are all found there, and their channels are also linked in the description. So, fellas, any preliminaries you'd like to discuss before we
Well, maybe
get
just
started?
giving sort of an overview concept, and that is that when it comes to the Septuagint, that we're not dealing with one document. We're not dealing with one necessarily perspective. That there is a that there's it's a lot more complex than I think a lot of times these conversations seem to indicate. There's a lot more going on with the Septuagint. And a second thing I would point out is that if Christians really believed that the Septuagint was such a reliable document, then why do they still rely on the Masoretic text in their Bibles? It
Mhm.
would seem to the logical thing seems to be that they would have switched over. But I think that some of the things we're going to talk about here is going to touch on the fact that Septuagint isn't as Christian friendly as we're oftentimes led to believe.
Sure. Yossi, anything to add on that?
I think it's a good start.
Yeah.
Okay.
And outside of the presentation, if anyone would like some interesting reading, um, something that plays well along in with what we're about to talk about, uh, Yossi brought this to my attention. Read the author's introduction to the 1611 King James. It offers some interesting insights on the LXX. We won't dig into that here, but just read it for yourself. I think you'll find it interesting. So let's get this up. We'll get started. Can you see that okay, guys?
I
Yep.
can see just fine.
All right. All right. So the Septuagint, evolution of the first Greek Bible. So to quote Emmanuel Tove, from the text critical use of the Septuagint, he says, the Septuagint is not a single translation, but a collection of translations differing in time, place, technique, and quality. Interesting quote. And then just to bring out the postulates here, like either side of the argument, you have the Christian claim, which is that the LXX or the Septuagint is Jewish, right? And that gives it credibility for their claim. But then you have the Jewish counter argument that the LXX is a Christian document. But the historical reality here is that it is originally authored by Jews and was stewarded under Christians. So, what do you think about that, fellows?
I would like to bring up the point that, when Professor Tove says that it's not a single translation and a collection of translations, um, as we'll see, as we progress, there were multiple translations going around at the time. Okay, and we also know of some later translations. We'll talk about Aquila
Hmm.
and the others. So uh, aside from the Pentateuch, the first five books, um, there there were probably at least a half a dozen translations of each of these books going around.
Sure, sure. Yeah,
Right.
I mean, once
And
once Greek really became the lingua franca of the region, um, you were finding translations of all these books popping up. Not just the Torah itself, but the the Nach, right? The prophets and the writings.
Yeah.
Um, so yeah, Tove is certainly right on that. That was a collection of translations differing in time, place, technique, and quality because you had all these different individuals making their own, right? And
Yeah.
it's an
Yeah.
interesting
It,
quote that a translation tells you more about the translator than what is being translated. So that I'm sure that's the mindset that Tove is, bringing this quote from.
Yeah.
and it's not like, oh, I'm sorry, go ahead.
And to go back to our discussion on Pshat and Drash, one of the points that we raised is that a bad translation is just a bad translation, and it's not eisegesis.
Right.
But and basically, we are the translator presents the text through his eyes.
Yeah.
Okay, so and you'll see this in the Targum. Okay, Targum Onkelos or Targum Yonatan. That's basically a commentary. A
Hmm.
lot of times, it's of course it keeps with the text, but a lot of times it adds some stuff in there.
Sure.
And that's how the rabbis use it oftentimes is they'll use Onkelos
Mhm.
as a actual commentary,
Hmm.
and they'll verify some of their own translations and look to Targum Onkelos as evidence. But it's still, even a good translation is a bad translation because to some extent you're divorced from the ability to see or understand the hints of the original intention of the author sometimes.
Right.
We say that the Torah has 70 facets, and what does that mean? It doesn't mean that there are an infinite number of interpretations. What it does mean, though, is that there is a lot of different nuances that you can pick up
Hmm.
from the text, and a lot of that gets lost in some of these translations.
Yeah.
And not and some of it for the negative, like when we're dealing with the pagan world, um, they're definitely going to see what they want to see in it. But coming from now, it would be correct to say, I believe, that most of the translations we have are from Greek Jews, not necessarily Jews who are in step, I guess you could say, with the Jews in Israel as far as the Pharisaical tradition, or what would you say about that?
Yeah, I would say that we'll go back. I think Professor Tove talks about this in this book in the text critical use of the Septuagint. By the way, I highly recommend uh, if you can get a copy. It's available online. Steve, I think you should put a link to that.
Sure.
Um, yeah, it really is a fantastic read, very enlightening. And he postulates that the Pentateuch, that the Torah was used similar to the way the Yemenites use the Targum today, and that when they would read a line of the Torah, they would read a line of the translation. So that's probably one of the reasons, it's a much more distilled translation than any of the other books of the Bible. Um, and it's generally considered a good translation.
Yeah. Well, I think another aspect that Hillel was trying to tease out there was that at the time you definitely had a major exchange of ideas. It's evident we're going to talk about him in a few minutes, but it's evident by Philo, right? I mean, his writings and his commentaries on the Torah and so on were very much inspired by, Greek epics and so on and so forth, and how he presented these ancient stories like creation, the flood, Abraham, so on and so forth. He was really presenting them allegorically in a more mythological manner. So you can see that there was that exchange of ideas there between the Greek world and the Jewish world, especially in these major hubs of not just trade like Alexandria, Egypt, but trade of idea, trade of thinking and worldview, right?
Yeah, and I think one other comment to make is that when we think about translations of text today, for example, if you're talking about translations of the Bible, whether it's the Hebrew scriptures or the New Testament scriptures, thanks to the printing press, it's a much more common to have, if you're going to have if you're going to have a mistake, you'll have a mistake in thousands of copies, from the one original.
Hmm.
But you're also going to have whatever the intention was. So we're used to having a very standardized translation, where in the ancient world maybe it wasn't as standardized always. And so you have these competing uh, Greek translations, just like uh, you might have like Bible discussions, Bible debates with the NASB, the King James version, things like that. But you don't have the printing press to reliably put those out there as well.
Sure.
Yeah, so the you raise a good point because um, you know, at some point after the first five books of uh, the Tanakh, um, we see less and less editorial stewardship.
Hmm.
Okay, so the same word might be translated differently, um, in the same book, where you will find that the first five books are much more consistent.
Sure. And I have a theory on why, but we'll get to that as we get deeper into the presentation.
Interested to hear.
All right. The Legend of Alexandria and the Letter of Aristeas. The law has been translated magnificently and reverently, and there is no difference between the copies. This is a quote from Letter of Aristeas, I'll say that line 310 and 311. And the context here is that the narrative of 72 scholars, where the Septuagint gets its name from, Targum Shivim, right, the 70,
Mhm.
six from each tribe, requested by Ptolemy II Philadelphus. And the scholarly comment by Tove is the reality is that the letter of Aristeas reflects an apologetic legend rather than historical fact. But it preserves an authentic memory of a Jewish translation of the Torah in Alexandria. And that's from his book, Textual Criticism of the Hebrew Bible. So if you guys would like to comment on that, I know there is, of course, the Jewish side of things and how that is presented traditionally, and we have, Tove's comments here. So if we could just discuss on this for a few minutes, I think that'd be good. But you are seeing some
Yeah,
overlap between the letter of Aristeas, Tove, what Tove says, and of course the Jewish tradition.
I think the standard take today is that it is a legend. If you look at the context, it says the narrative of 72 scholars, six from each tribe. Where were they going to get six from each tribe? Like most of the tribes were not there at the time. Okay, uh, that's like sort of a dead giveaway. So I can understand, and also he was writing much later. That so I understand that the people in Alexandria, the Jews in Alexandria who were using this as part of the synagogue service would like that. What's the word? The gushpanka. They would like the stamp of approval. That this is a canonized text. So the legend arose.
Sure.
It is what it is.
Well, I think that the story of Ptolemy having the 72 scholars come up is a midrash, and I think it's sort of up to you to decide how much you think this is a historical event or not. It could be that it was like what Tove was suggesting here, what you're suggesting, Yossi, but it could also be they could have happened. It could be that when you asked the question about the missing tribes. I was telling Steve this earlier, that I've met people who have claims that they can trace their family back to various tribes. Like I had a rabbi who said his family tradition was they came from Issachar, and we have the lost tribes that are gathering together. And when we're going back in time, this is much closer to a period where we might have had more contact with the tribes. But it really just sort of like, I don't know that is the main focus. I think what the point is that it seems to be the agreement is no matter whether you had the story of the 72 elders or not making the same translation decisions as each other. What you do have is a very reliable text that people seem to be very pleased with. That felt like it reflected as authentic a translation as you could
Mhm.
possibly have.
Yeah, one thing that's super, super important, we haven't said it yet, and I think anybody who does any kind of video worth its salt on the subject is that this translation is only of the Torah, only of
Yeah.
the first five books, and
Right.
has nothing to do with the rest of the
Right.
the
Sure.
translation.
Right. Sure. I think I'll keep my own personal opinions to myself, but I think if you align with the Jewish traditional telling that this was, a miraculous translation, they all made the same corrections and, they all produced the same document. Or if you take, perhaps more of a Tove idea that there could have been some deliberation and they came to, no matter however many rabbis were there, right? I mean, it would seem because it's even in the Greek preserved as the LXX 70. So it would seem that it was a rather large group of learned Jews, rabbis. Even if there was some deliberation, they weren't put in separate rooms, right? At the end of the day, you're getting a Jewish rendering of the Torah into Greek, whether it be the traditional telling of this miraculous event or, just the scholarly approach that this was, perhaps a collaborative effort. I think the bare bones of it is the same, right? That you are getting an originally Jewish translation into Greek by learned Jews at the time
Mhm.
for the Library of Alexandria. I think that's kind of like unequivocal, right?
Or for the use in synagogue.
Sure. Or for that also, sure.
Yeah.
I mean, yeah. The Greek that's being used for the Septuagint, the original, though we don't really know if that's been passed down to us. As far as we know, that original has been lost. So we're probably dealing with a different translation of the Pentateuch of the
Right.
first five books.
Yeah, I'm really not sure about that statement.
Okay.
And I'll tell you why. Because as I said, it's generally considered a good translation. And if this was just something that kind of, popped up, you know, where did it pop up from?
Yeah.
If it was not like they made let's say however many scholars, 70 scholars, 72 scholars made this translation. And however, they had just have one copy for the library in Alexandria. Okay. And there's no reason why copies couldn't have gotten around. And again, it's generally considered a good translation.
Mhm.
And as we'll see when we talk about Christian stewardship, um, when you're going to create a document, you're going to look at translations that you have. And since there is this very uneven, good translations on the one hand versus bad translations, or if you want to use a nice word, eclectic translations on the other, um, you're going to use the text you have. You don't want to, reinvent the wheel.
Right. Sure.
Yeah,
Especially in
I
an
mean,
age where you couldn't mass produce anything, right?
right.
Yeah.
But you can also have this a good translations that's not the actual original that we were talking about.
Again, I don't see how that happens. Why would we have, again, we see an editorial oversight on um, the first five books. Okay,
Yeah.
they're much more consistent, and that would lend us to to understand or to believe that this was created for liturgical use, and it was this was the text.
Sure. I mean, if you go with the traditional telling that all 72 made their own rendering of it, where did the other 71 go if only one copy was kept? right?
Yeah.
I mean, you could even just approach it that way. Um, but interestingly enough, I don't necessarily disbelieve the legend. For sure, Ptolemy II was compiling the world's wisdom literature because, I mean, the library was quite an undertaking. So obviously, you want to fill it with the most important documents. So I don't disbelieve the legend, obviously, but just based upon, as you said, Yossi, how consistent the five books are, I think you did have a perpetuation of whatever was rendered that day, and perhaps the black and white original that was kept in Alexandria was lost, but I think you
Mhm.
probably have copies of it that made their way into what we now know as the LXX.
Yeah.
Does that make sense? Can
Yeah.
we agree on that
That's
point?
I agree on that point.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, my only objection is that um, and it's really an objection I have on a lot of the discussions when we come to uh, the question of authorship, and that is that you know, as far as I know, um, we don't have, in fact, even today, people who were there who can attest to the fact that this was the original, and so we're assuming, based on reason and logic, that perhaps this was the original. It could have been based on the original, but it could also be that this was originally written for Jews out in the diaspora in Egypt, in the Greek speaking areas, and that maybe they came back and they created a new translation. But I mean, I guess I don't really think that maybe that doesn't really cause any sort of critical debate or disagreement on
Yeah.
that point. It's the point of speculation, I guess, at some point.
Well, a
Oh, sure.
quality translation, even a bad translation. I mean, let's be honest with you. If you take a book like Yeshayahu, like Isaiah,
Yeah,
and just you yourself translate it, that's a hell of an undertaking.
Hmm.
sure.
Okay, and especially if
Totally.
you take the Torah, this it's the five books, much longer, and it, you know it's an undertaking. It's a financial undertaking, and to do that well with editorial guidelines, that I don't see them doing that a second time.
Yeah.
They
Yeah, I
could
agree.
have, but I don't see them doing it a second time.
Right. Yeah, for sure. Especially when it's being, we understand traditionally also that the synagogue in Alexandria was pretty substantial in size.
Yes.
Um, so if you're having this massive undertaking done in that same city with probably the largest synagogue at the time in the diaspora, I mean, you would think that the something would be kept, right?
Yeah.
Well, I guess perhaps it's something like we have with English translations of the Torah. I mean, that's mostly of interest in the diaspora. So if you take English, America and Britain, then you're going to have that shared translation. But coming into Israel, you're going to have more Hebrew only texts.
Right.
And so, really, so I guess in one sense, maybe I'm agreeing with Yossi a little bit on this, is that those communities who are immigrating back into the country might have brought those texts back with them.
Yeah, but not
But
even, I
those
mean,
texts,
but just think about the connection, Hillel. You're having this translation made in Alexandria, and you have probably the largest Hellenistic Jewish community probably in the diaspora at that time in the same city, right? So just as you said, English translations for the Torah are for the diaspora. I don't think that that would have been any different.
that's what I was just saying.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So I think we're in agreement on that.
Yeah, no, I was pointing out that maybe I could see maybe where Yossi's coming from a little bit, just from the idea that if we treat this as a product of that diaspora, then just like today, like, for example, making Aliyah, you come into the land and you're not as fluent in Hebrew as the native speaker, so you're going to want to have um, the translation of the language you speak available
Mhm.
to you to read the Torah more.
Sure.
Then maybe that could be an argument for how it gets dispersed into the land and comes in. So yeah,
Yeah,
I
and
don't know.
then and one final note is we cannot forget that there was Christian stewardship, which does mean that they could have made changes and whatnot,
Sure.
but the
Of course.
original that original text was Jewish text.
Mhm.
All right, moving on. All right. Perspectives on legitimacy, citing Philo and Josephus. So Philo, as we mentioned before, in his Life of Moses, he says, they, meaning the translators, were not merely translators, but prophets, each in harmony with the others. So this goes to show really how revered the translation was in the Greek diaspora, especially. It reflects Alexandrian Jewish reverence, inspiration language distinct from later Christian doctrine. And Josephus, in his Antiquities, Book 12, says, the law was translated into the Greek tongue with great accuracy. And he was writing for a Greco-Roman audience. He
Mhm.
accepts Aristeas but promotes Greek legitimacy. So these are both pretty good confirmations that whatever was rendered initially was rather good.
Yeah, I
Yeah,
don't think there's any disagreement with that. Yeah.
as far as Josephus, you mentioned Aristeas. Is he talking about Aristeas, or he's talking about the LXX?
What's that?
The comment that says writing for a Greco-Roman audience accepts Aristeas but promotes Greek legitimacy.
Right.
Um,
It would seem that he
because
accepts Aristeas's account that there was, you know.
okay, I'm sorry, I mixed up. Sorry, my bad.
No, you're good.
Okay.
But as we
Made a
said,
mistake.
especially you see Philo is from Alexandria, so you're seeing
Yeah.
probably how endeared this initial document was to that community. But
Yeah, sure.
we do see that in Philo's own theology that he was pretty well outside of the mainstream, right?
Yeah.
So you're seeing the worldview effect that the diaspora and those exchange of ideas we spoke about earlier was having
Mhm.
on those dispersed Jewish communities. Um, but even though both of these individuals might have been outside the mainstream, these are Jewish sources that are attesting to a very good initial rendering of the Torah.
Well, Josephus was very much mainstream. He was from a Pulshia. He was a Pharisee, and he was a religious Jew. And he talks about putting on tefillin, and the
Sure.
only way is to a way of Torah. So he was very much in the mainstream.
Yeah. You've read all of Josephus, I assume, because you can find some pretty outside the mainstream jargon in his writings. But yeah, I agree.
Yeah,
He does
his
promote the Pharisaic
testimony.
movement quite a lot.
Yeah, his personal testimony is that. Um, Uh, to the best of my knowledge, he did not know Greek. He did not write in Greek at Lake, right? So whoever was translating him or
Right.
doing the
Um,
dictation.
my biggest issue with Josephus is a lot of his timelines seem to clash with traditional Jewish timelines, but other than that, and that might have also been Christian stewardship as well. Who knows?
Mhm.
But
I mean, the Christians were the ones who were the stewards of Josephus too,
mhm.
Yeah.
right? So
Okay.
All right, moving on. The Recoil, A Day of Darkness. Now we're going to get into some Jewish traditional takes on the LXX and its translation. So in Tractate Sophrim 1:7, we see it happened on the eighth day of Tevet that the Torah was written in Greek in the days of King Ptolemy, and darkness came to the world for 3 days. In Megillas Tanit, we see that day was as grievous for Israel as the day on which the golden calf was made. And in Megillah 1:9, found in the Yerushalmi Talmud, we see the Torah could not be translated properly. So, what is the thematic takeaway from all of this Jewish literature on the event? Is
it's
that
a
these post
disaster.
yeah, is that these post factum reflections reveal a fear of loss of precision, theological misuse, and the displacement of Hebrew authority.
But
Um,
and that's reflected on what we see today. For example, you have all this web access to Midrash and
mhm,
Gemara and all these things, and we have people who haven't been taught or trained on how to read this material,
Right.
reading it and saying, well, I read an English translation, I must understand it
Right.
because
Right.
I know how to read a book. And then they go out there and they give completely bad explanations.
Hmm.
And this is what we were talking about with the Midrash and Peshat in our last one. And so what this represents is that on the one hand, there's a great opportunity in making things closer to us. Like, for example, if you take you could take sort of like mystical ideas, and you can have language that can help more people understand complex ideas. So the Ramban, for example, I think he points to this in his commentary on Genesis in the beginning, where he talks about having the use of these Greek terms or philosophical concepts actually helps explain certain mystical ideas better,
Hmm.
because Hebrew didn't have those terms to encompass the ideology. You just seem to have needed to have a really, really good understanding of the tradition and the Torah and everything in order to grab onto that. And the Rambam reflects this kind of idea as well. So, but we go forward in time, and then we of course have science, which gives us new terminology, new ideas of how to communicate complex ideas better. However, on the other hand, you also have this cheapening and of the mysticism of Judaism, of things like the Kabbalah Center, where then it sort of becomes a little farcical. It becomes it misses the point of maybe what some of those ideas were meant to communicate,
Yeah.
and giving you sort of a incorrect notion of Judaism and its teachings. And so this happens. So the translate, not only that, but it removes the Jew, I think, from that authentic tradition that really bound us as a people, was having the Hebrew to read and
Hmm.
understanding the original language. We're talking about a vocabulary of about 8,000 words in the Hebrew scriptures, and the the requirement of close reading to be able to understand what's going on is lost on people who have translations, because I think we said this at the very beginning. The direction of understanding has been chosen by the translator.
Yeah.
And so you've lost quite something there as well.
I think it was Cervantes who said that reading a translation is like looking at the opposite side, the reverse side of a Belgian tapestry.
Yes.
Okay, it's not quite there. It's not quite
Right.
correct, and I think that we can bring up from all kinds of different religions where these translations have caused havoc.
Sure.
And if I remember correctly, I think it was the Catholic Church who said that no, that the Bible is ours now. Okay, it's not yours
Yeah.
anymore.
Yeah.
Hmm.
And
Well,
they,
they think that they're the new Israel. They've inherited all the promises of Israel anyway. So they've replaced us. And
yeah,
so they've replaced our text as well.
Right. Well, I think the core of what is being mourned here, at its most basic, is that there was even a need for this. That Hebrew literacy amongst Jews in the diaspora was so low that it was necessary that they read in a different language, right?
mhm,
So I think that's really at its most basic what the tragedy was. That that the original that Hebrew literacy was so low that
mhm.
it needed to be, made into something else.
Well, to discuss that further, when Megillah Tanit talks about it was as grievous to Israel as on the day in which the golden calf was made, what does that mean? It means that is that we took the language of pagans and used that to explain our Torah. And
That's what they were speaking. I mean,
yeah,
yeah,
exactly. They were speaking the language of pagans. And so they took that and they turned the Torah in some ways into a golden calf.
Hmm.
Um, we see that in English as well. Like when, with some of our disagreements with Christians on how things are translated, they translate it a way that's points more towards what the conclusion they want to draw, which is
mhm,
Jesus. and which veers you away from what the Hebrew scriptures was actually saying.
Right. Something interesting on that golden calf comment. I was listening to a lecture not too long ago, and the whole golden calf incident, it seems that that the golden calf was made to replace Moses. And it said, this is what brought you out of Egypt, right?
Right. Yes.
Um, so the interesting parallel is you're replacing Moses, the original, with,
Mhm.
this statue of gold, right? This
Mhm.
Mhm.
false god, whatever. Not even necessarily that this thing was Hashem, that this thing was there to replace Hashem, but that this thing was there to lead the Israelites in the wilderness, right? Rather than Moses, who is the direct conduit to God,
Mhm.
right? Um,
Mhm.
Now you parallel that with the Greek. So rather than having the Hebrew, the direct conduit to the mind of God, the language in which the universe was created, now you're using something different, something else, right? Something that isn't intrinsically holy, right? Not Lashon HaKodesh, right? I
Yeah.
think that's an even more stark parallel. Um, you're negating Moses for something false. Now you're negating the Hebrew for something false.
Mhm.
Does that make sense? Does that seem to
Sure.
align with what the Megillah is saying there?
Yeah, I would say so. I'd say that's
Yeah,
a
I think
good,
you get there. Yeah.
yeah. I mean, I would say something in general about translations, and I imagine that all three of us are guilty of this, and because we all probably use translations for whatever. I know that I do. Not so much for Tanakh, but for certainly when I read the Aramaic of Daniel, um, is that again, it's a comfortable thing. This is the language I
Sure.
speak.
Right.
I want
Sure.
to I want to be comfortable, so it becomes a necessity. And the language that I might not understand goes by the wayside
Yeah.
because it's hard work.
Hmm.
Well, and but also, translations also represent a certain level of assimilation too.
Mhm.
Sure. Of course.
You know.
All
Yeah.
right. The rabbinic philosophy of translation. One who translates a verse literally is a liar, and one who adds to it is a blasphemer. That's from the Talmud Bavli, Kedushin 49a. The cultural parallel. Traditore, traditore. The translator is a traitor. Very interesting. Literary parallel. Translation from one language to another is like viewing a piece of tapestry on the wrong
Oh,
side. You
there
just
you go.
cited
So,
that,
There's
Yossi.
Cervantes. Yeah.
Poetic parallel. Poetry is what is lost in translation from Robert Frost.
and this is actually a big problem that we have when we talk about Psalms. Is a lot of Christian or a lot of the prophets is that Christians will try to translate, in some cases when it's beneficial, things hyper literally,
Hmm.
including poetical uh, verses and books, and, and they're not meant to be understood that way. And it's a really interesting point.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. I was going to say something, but I forgot.
I'm sorry, I tend to stun
It's the age.
thoughts
It's
out of
good.
people's heads.
I'm getting. Yeah, but what I was going to say is this: is that when you can go back or whatever,
No, you're fine.
is that when you have a translation and then you commentate, your commentary is on the translation rather than the original text. What exactly is that?
Right.
Right.
Okay, because as I mentioned earlier, a reasonable translation is a commentary. It's
Hmm.
it's what the translator, his understanding of the text. So you're taking someone else's understanding of the text, and now you are drawing conclusions based on some other person's understanding of the text as opposed to the original.
Right.
And
It's
people get into a lot of trouble.
Yeah.
it's a problem. Well, the fact of the matter is, unless you've tried to understand the text on your own, and you're reading the Torah, if you go right to Rashi and you don't try to understand what the text is saying, then what happens is not only do you not understand the Torah text, you probably don't understand Rashi,
Right.
and that compounds the problem when people make misunderstandings. And so I make it my practice that when I'm reading the Torah, I try to understand what the Torah itself is saying. And then when I read Rashi or even Ezra or someone else, and I read, oh, they agree with me, then I get a stronger understanding of how my point worked. Or if they disagree with me, I understand the flaws in the approach that I took to the understanding I arrived at.
Mhm.
There's a common phrase that we use here in Israel, Roshi lifnei Rashi. Uh, Roshi, my head, okay, my understanding before I delve into Rashi.
Mhm.
And it's profoundly important to not read just Rashi.
Right.
And this is
Right.
this is a huge mistake that they're making. Rashi was phenomenal, phenomenally brilliant, man. But he was not the best at everything. Okay, there are other commentators who are better grammarians, and we know that there are issues, for instance, with Ibn Ezra, where he didn't necessarily know the geography of the land of Israel,
Right.
and this kind of stuff. So, and in some cases, I bring this up, when I discuss this with with kids when I'm talking about this, is that, we can go to Jerusalem and we can go to the city of David and we can see where David assumed to have lived, right? And we can see the distances and the geography. Rashi, Ibn Ezra, Malbim, these people couldn't see that.
Right.
Right.
And it doesn't mean that they weren't phenomenally, uh, you know, gifted. It's just that they didn't have this at their fingertips. So a kid can go there and look at something and understand something that Rashi could not understand. And somebody may say, oh, you're saying something terrible because Rashi maybe knew by Ruach HaKodesh. Well, there's some things you can't really know by
Well, I
Ruach
mean,
HaKodesh.
that's why we also have the Ikra Gadolot. Like we have compendiums of different commentaries to give us a broader perspective. But
Mhm.
Yeah.
you know, there is a having boots on the ground approach also that's helpful. And also, I'll just say that um, I don't know if Steve you've ever been to, maybe you have Yossi, but if you've been to the Temple Institute
Sure.
and you go in there and you see these vessels meant for temple service, that those verses in the Torah that your eyes glazed over every time you read them,
Mhm.
but then you see these vessels in front of your eyes, then it becomes something completely different. It becomes, you're able to incorporate that into your thinking. And so the next time you read the text, you've got the imagery in your head. You have like I think what Yossi's saying, you've got this sort of different understanding and a more possibly accurate understanding of certain things. It's a tremendous experience
Mhm.
looking at it like that, and then going and I've been out to where the Shiloh, biblical
Mhm.
Shiloh, and seeing the caves that the Leviim used to stay in, and where the tabernacle was pitched and all that. And it does not, when you see it, it does not match what you had in your imagination. It doesn't match with what you expected to find. It's something different. But then it gives a great deal of texture to what you read when you read the Torah.
Hmm. Interesting. All right, moving on. The textual reality, which is the
We're also
variability.
there's like this, there's kind of like, very kind of like long pause between slides.
Variability in technique.
Yes.
So, according to Tove, some books reflect a close adherence to the Hebrew text, while others reflect freedom, interpretation, and even rewriting. And here we have a graph showing the spectrum of, all the way from literal to completely rewritten, right? So on the left
Mhm.
side, near literal, we have books like Leviticus, right? And as we said before, the Torah seems to be much more consistent than the rest. Genesis seems a bit more moderately free. Isaiah, Job, and the Proverbs are highly interpretive. And when you get into books like Esther or Daniel, uh, they're at
They
the
were
point of
rewritten.
being rewritten. Okay. So a linguistic example, the term Torah is nomos, right? Therefore, lawless is anomos. Consequently, Zerah Sheker in Isaiah 57:4 is translated conceptually as sperma anomos, or offspring without law. Anything
Yeah,
to
so
comment on this,
yeah.
fellas?
Well, other to say that you find the again, I'm a Greek reader, but not a Greek understander.
Hmm.
Okay. Um, but I do, I do read the introductions and stuff as uh, depending on who, if somebody is polite, they're going to say that Isaiah is highly interpretive or eclectic, and other people will say that it's terrible. Um, you know, uh, so it's important. Again, we mentioned that the books of the Torah had the editing over, evidently, people overseeing that the editing was consistent and the word usage was consistent, and we don't have that with Isaiah and Psalms also.
Hmm.
Okay, and I think I don't know if there's a quote that I mentioned from the introduction to the New English Translation Septuagint, the nets.
Okay.
Okay, I got to look for that. I don't know if it's in. I don't know if it made it in here.
I don't think so.
Just while he's looking for that, I'll just
Yeah,
mention that with Leviticus you need a more literal interpretation because I mean it's practical. It's a practical book. Genesis is a book of stories for the most part,
Hmm.
yeah,
and so some of these stories, like you get into the first parts of Genesis, like the story of Adam and Eve, the Garden of Eden, and Noah's flood, then sometimes how do you are you supposed to take those as literal, or is there a certain amount of wiggle room? Is there a certain level of freedom, as it here says, moderately free translation here? I mean, how closely do you stick to the text? How much are you saying no? We should also be more literal with this.
Right.
mhm.
Um,
Yeah.
so yeah.
Well, I found the quote. The quote
Okay.
says about Isaiah, one can find numerous passages where the translator has failed to understand the Hebrew text and where the Greek appears to be solistic and even unintelligible.
Mm.
And I didn't quote the rest of this, but it also says that there are places where the translator says the exact opposite of what Isaiah was saying. It's interesting that I would be interested in knowing how a book like Hosea uh, would rank on
Hmm.
this chart. Number one, Isaiah and Eov and Job are Job in particular is a bear to understand in the Hebrew. It's not a pleasant read. I don't
Yeah.
think in any language. Um, so it's not something I study often. I'm in love with Isaiah, so I'm always reading Isaiah. But it's also certainly up to what about chapter 40 is a difficult. You need to work at it. It's not like reading maybe Yirmiyahu. Proverbs interests me because Proverbs is wisdom literature.
Yep.
Okay, and typical of I don't know. You can tell me exactly how many centuries, fourth, fifth century BCE, um, that this type of literature was, common not only in the Hebrew speaking world. Um, so it's interesting that would be highly interpretive.
Mm. I said I had a theory as to why you see books like Isaiah, Job, Proverbs, prophetic literature, wisdom literature, etc., being highly interpretive. So my theory on why that is, and you see it today with use of Tanakh and the New Testament, in especially the Christian world, not necessarily just in translations, but even just in explanations. right? So when you delve into Nach, especially prophetic literature, in modern convention, um, how is prophetic literature perceived, right? Is that these books, these writings, are in effect telling the future. You see that a lot, right?
Mhm.
That might not have necessarily been the explicit purpose when they were written, but as you're getting to this point, nearing late antiquity, I think you would have had a bit more, as we said, exchange of ideas, melding of cultures, right? Understanding that in these pagan cultures there were oracles that had omens and all these different things.
Mhm.
So I think the reason that less so with the Torah, which is really, I mean, it literally means the instructions, right? This is how you live. But as you start getting into the prophetic literature, which does have end time prophecies in it, and so on and so forth, they are trying to meld these things around what they're experiencing in their own daily lives. And that would make sense also for wisdom literature, because the things you're going through, you want your literature to speak to you on, right?
Right.
So I think, especially in the prophetic books, and maybe even Esther and Daniel, because they delve into some interesting things at the contemporary period,
Mhm.
I think you would see them being much more interpretive and much more rewritten, as the far right says,
Mhm.
because these things were being, interjected into their contemporary time, into their present reality. I think that could be an interesting, interpretation or explanation as to why it's specifically those books. And I think they were held less reverently than the Torah, right?
Oh, absolutely. Even today, they're held
Even
less
today, of course.
reverently. Yeah.
But as you see with every denomination, how they approach even their own literature, like Revelation and so on, every generation is interjecting that into their own life and their own
Mhm.
time,
Yeah,
right? So why would it be any different just because it's 2,000 years ago? Does that make sense?
Makes perfect sense to me.
sure.
But that's the
Okay.
theory I had spoken about earlier, Yossi. I know you said
Mhm.
you were interested to hear it.
Yes. Yes.
All right. So a case study, the virgin controversy from Isaiah 7:14. So in the Masoretic text in the Hebrew, we see the word Alma, but in the Septuagint LXX, we see Parthenos. So, linguistic context. This is an example of shifting meaning. A Hebrew parallel to this would be Eitz, meaning tree in Genesis, but wood in the Mishnah, where Elon became tree. In Greek context, Parthenos did not originally mean virgin in a strict biological sense, but indicated a social status. That's interesting. Anything to say on that, fellas?
Oh boy, we could do a whole show on that.
I think we will
Yeah.
next time.
Well, I mean, I think we've talked about this Parthenos issue and how the meaning of it's changed throughout the out through time, even in the use of Greek, from Old Greek and whatnot.
Mhm.
But but I guess the more interesting question is what caused Parthenos to be locked in, talking about a virgin specifically, and to uh, and or was it when it was used for the Septuagint? Like who? I mean, we don't have the people who translated the Septuagint to ask them what they were thinking about when they used the word Parthenos in order to interpret the word Alma. And Alma's on the question of virginity is ambiguous. She could have been a virgin, she may not have been a virgin. But you know, so yeah, I don't know like why they would use that word, which for a long time had an ambiguous meaning to it.
Right.
Okay, well, I'll go back to first of all, the Alma in Isaiah 7:14 is not a virgin; she's already pregnant. Okay,
Right.
so
The
we'll
text, yeah.
start with that. So if we're just looking at the etymology, the meaning of the specific word, yes, and Alma can be a virgin,
Mhm.
but a pregnant one is
He's not a
not a
virgin.
virgin. Yeah, not a
Correct.
virgin. Okay. Um,
Unless
Oh yeah,
You're
okay.
someone who believes that just like 700 years later, Jesus was born of a virgin who, for some mysterious reason, suddenly produced this child and was pregnant with a child without the help of any other man, and that happened 700 years before as well, then I guess you could make that argument.
Yeah, that's I think that we'll save all the arguments on that one for because okay, but as far as Parthenos is, it's the reason I brought the example from um the changing of the meaning or understanding of the words, right? So
Yeah,
we see this today. Okay, I don't know how I'm in my 60s. Okay, so when the word gay was used, it did not mean homosexual, right?
Right.
right.
Sure.
It still had the connotation of being happy.
Hmm.
And we've
Or
seen
stupid,
I don't know,
according from
but
Stephen from The Office. Yeah, it was.
okay, but but as you know, this is a natural kind of progression, and it can happen quickly or it can happen
Sure.
slowly. But we're talking about a period of hundreds of several hundred years, and
Yeah,
by the time we get to Origin, we have these three translators. We have Aquila and Symmachus and Theodotion, right?
Yep.
That's how you pronounce it. If
Hmm.
you have these three guys who all translate Alma as Nianis, right, which
right,
means young woman.
Yep.
right,
Okay, it's like it's one of the three different words that's used to translate a young person of some sort
Right.
in the Septuagint.
Hmm.
So you know, and Steve brought some examples. I think that's the next slide.
Yep.
There you go.
So to some etymological excavation, focusing on the case of Iole. Okay, for anyone who might not be familiar with this story, this will give you some insight. Um, the case of Iole, the source material here we're going to be looking into is from Sophocles in his Trichoneae. So the narrative is that Iole, the daughter of Eurytus, is offered as a prize in an archery contest. Heracles, which is his Greek name, Hercules in Latin, wins but is denied the prize. Heracles then kills Iole's brother, destroys her city, and takes her as a captive concubine, which is a non-consensual union. Anyone who knows what a concubine is mean they're not just playing patty cakes.
right,
Um, the linguistic evidence is that despite this forced concubinage, Sophocles still refers to her in the play as Parthenos. The conclusion: in classical Greek, the term could describe social or marital status, unmarried, rather than simply sexual purity, though it came to mean virgin more exclusive by the first century. Interestingly enough, you'll actually find more people who translate Sophocles. They will kind of they'll try to take Parthenos out because it
Mhm.
doesn't in modernity hold the same uh, connotation, right? As you said,
right.
meanings can change. Um, but yes, yeah, so Sophocles uses that word, even though quite clearly she's not a virgin if she's
I mean,
being forced into
we have
concubinage,
we have
right?
a very, I mean, common example. For example, the use of the word atheist in today's parlance means someone who does not believe in God. And you read the trial of Socrates, and Socrates is accused of being a atheist who leads the youth to worship other gods or new gods. So is he an atheist or is he someone who's who believes in other gods, right? Well, the difference in the meaning of atheist at the time was you didn't believe in the local gods.
Yeah,
To some extent, that holds true today. You just have to know what you're talking about. Most people, however, use it colloquially to mean you don't believe in any form of God at all.
yeah,
But that's a new way of understanding the word.
yeah. Well,
So,
as humanity really shifted into a more Abrahamic and monotheistic model across, the
right,
globe, atheists kind of adapted as well, right?
sure. And so, like, and you can look at other terms in the Talmud, in the Tanakh, the word goy,
Hmm.
depending on what period of time you're talking about, can mean different things. And sometimes when you're reading various Jewish texts, you have to know what time period something was written in,
Of
so you can
course,
understand the
the historical context is one of the most important things when approaching these texts, especially when we're talking about the social status of a Parthenos, right?
right.
So if you're a man of station and you have a beautiful daughter, of course you are going to use her as a bargaining chip, present it as a Parthenos, whether she slept with a guy in secret or not, right?
Sure.
For, some type of normally monetary compensation that she would then be given in marriage to someone else.
Well, I think women were used even. I mean, I can think of like Augustus Caesar separating. I mean, he had a wife who was previously married,
Hmm.
and he forcefully, ended that marriage agreement and took her for his own. Like, virginity, I don't know exactly to what degree it was held as sacred. Maybe depending on the time period. I don't know.
Sure.
I mean,
Yeah,
if
And
yeah,
ignorance is
go ahead.
bliss after all, right? So, I mean, it all depends on what the father or so on is pawning her off to be. If the father doesn't know if she had some secret rendezvous, that's totally besides the point, as long as the suitor is being convinced that she's, biologically a virgin, right? So I think
Or
you have
even,
you
I mean,
definitely
even
have
if
that
they,
context playing in the usage of the word.
I mean, even if you know that she's had, relations with the man before, again, it's a broader understanding of it, more of a, uh, again, like we have with, Alma. It's talking about the
Mhm.
age, not necessarily the sexual status of the girl.
Right.
I seem to remember. I want to backtrack just a little bit. I saw either a video or maybe you discussed this about the Parthenon.
Yeah.
Right.
Okay,
Hmm.
and by the
Yep.
time that okay, so you remind me. So by that time, it meant it came to mean virgin already.
Right, right, because Athena, so the Parthenon was a temple to Athena, right, on top of the Acropolis in Athens,
Yes.
bearing her name, right, Athens, Athena. She was the what would that be called? The patron god of the city, right?
Mhm.
So by that time, virginhood was seen as something, um, something to be revered, right? So now that you have the Parthenon, which was really the temple to the Virgin Athena, she was held in high regard because she maintained her purity, right? So obviously, as you're
Sure.
moving forward in time, as we're getting close to the authorship of the New Testament, like as we said, that Parthenos, as we get closer to the first century, more exclusively became just virgin, right?
Mhm.
Rather than simply just a social status category. The Parthenon demonstrates that well, that maintaining your sexual purity was held in high regard. And interestingly enough, the Parthenon in the Christian period was made into a church of the Virgin Mary.
Mhm.
Isn't that interesting?
Yes, it is.
The Virgin Mary. She was definitely a virgin. Wink, wink. We all know
We do know that
that.
because they tell us so, right? Yeah, that's one interesting fact I've always found rather interesting is that the pagan temple, really dedicated to a virgin goddess, became a church dedicated to the Virgin Mother, right? No, nothing fishy there at all.
Right.
All right. Christian adoption, agreements with the New Testament. Textual exhibit, Psalm 40, verse 6, and Hebrews 10, verse 5. In the Masoretic text, it reads, Oznaim karisali, my ears you have opened. In the Septuagint, it says, Soma de katertizo moi, a body you prepared for me. The
Mhm.
implication, the author of Hebrews relies specifically on the LXX reading, a body you prepared, to formulate the theology of the incarnation, a reading absent from the Hebrew.
Okay, so yeah, this is generally agreed upon as something that Christians changed, as opposed to bad translation that it
Hmm.
could be misunderstood or understood in a different way.
Right.
Um, there are not a whole lot of these,
Hmm.
surprisingly.
But how do you dare to change my Bible?
Okay. But yeah,
Just put a little Toby Singer there, just throw him in there.
yeah,
I mean,
Cordon
you're
Singer, yeah,
channeling the Tovia Singer look. I like it.
yes.
Yeah,
But yeah,
how dare you? Yeah, but
well, first of all, yeah, I think that's actually more true with modern translations than it is with the LXX.
uh-huh.
Okay, I think that for the most part, um, however bad a translation this particular book or that particular paragraph might be, um, the, the the translations were Jewish, and the intent was not to um, to Christian make it what's the word Christianize it,
Yeah. Christianize it.
to Christianize it. Okay, but this is one case that's generally agreed upon as one case where Christians did change this um, in order to harmonize it
Sure.
with the New Testament.
Interesting. Very interesting. Um, yeah, it's one of those things where, because you'll often hear the apologetic, the New Testament is quoting the Septuagint. Uh, as you said, it's generally agreed upon that this was actually changed to agree with the New Testament. So it's kind
I
of
mean,
a
I have a general objection, and I know that we're going into a explanation of the Septuagint and whatnot, but I have a general objection when it's brought to my attention that the Septuagint says something other than what the Torah text says, the version that we've got. That's in everybody's. It's the basis for all the translations that Christians have in their Bibles that we have in ours. And that is then is that who cares if that's what the Septuagint says? You know, it's interesting, but it doesn't really matter. It doesn't really affect because we have our tradition of the book that we use, and you're not even using the Septuagint as the source for your translation. You're just picking out the things you like. So I find it a very disingenuous argument when Christians bring that up. Um, that's just my opinion.
well, let me say this. I've written a book on Hebrews. I don't know if either of you read it. And how it was really the whole point of the letter is to create a pacifist Judaism. It's really a Roman propaganda tactic.
Mhm.
The whole epistle to the Hebrews is that it's shifting everything from the world economy, right, from the Jewish physical economy of a king that rules Israel, right, and shifting everything into this cosmic hierarchy. Because of course, at the time, you're in the height of Jewish rebellion against Rome. The book is linked in the description if anyone wants to check it out. I'm obviously not going to just give the whole book here in 30 seconds, but I think what you see here is the author of Hebrews, rather than necessarily quoting anything, he is, as I suggest in the book, making making a new Judaism. So he's not quoting anything. He is making this to really propagandize and try to convince Jews at the time to believe this new watered down universal pacifist Judaism. So it would make sense that you don't find its precedent in the LXX, but rather that the LXX was changed later by the Christian stewards to make it match Hebrews. Because I don't believe Hebrews is quoting anything, but rather that the LXX then has to quote Hebrews. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay, well, I would like to point one thing out that you know, people should not think that we're trashing the LXX or anything. But our primary use for the LXX is to help us with etymology.
Sure.
Okay, words that are difficult to understand. That yeah, we can
Hmm.
not just look at
Sure.
the Ugrit or the Akkadit. And we also have this, this Greek translation to help us
Mhm.
understand words. That's probably the primary use that we
Well,
Jews
that's
would
what,
have at this
Right.
point.
and that's what Rashi does with Old French. Like we have
Yeah.
precedent for that,
Hmm.
Sure.
Sure.
that we
Of
do
course.
that. Sure.
It's legitimate.
I think it's just when you have, like in this instance here, Psalm 46 versus Hebrews 10:5,
Mhm.
Right.
these two statements are so different, right? I'm sure it's
Yeah.
not just a variant found in a different traditional text that
Mhm.
Hebrews quoted, right?
Yeah.
This was something
Yeah.
Christologically made for Hebrews' own purposes, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Presumably. Yeah.
All right, so disagreements with the New Testament. The New Testament writers did not follow a single fixed Greek text. For example, Psalm 2 and 12, the standard LXX reads, Droxaste paideas, embrace education rather than the theological kiss the son. Interesting one
Yeah.
there.
What's interesting about it is you do not find that in the Pshitata, right? You don't find Kiss the Sun in the Vulgate. You don't find Kiss the Sun in the Netus Latina.
Hmm.
And of course, you do not find it in the Targum Yonatan. So those
Right.
five, the translations, these are the major translations. None of them say Kiss the Sun.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Trying to think what the original Hebrew is. Nash Kubar, right? Like
Ashgabar.
Nashkuval Pentenaf. Yes.
Yeah.
uh something about like embrace purity or something like that to that effect.
The only one of those translations, including, okay, or exclude, I don't know what the word is, the Targum, the only one that matches the embrace purity is the Netus Latina,
Interesting.
the pre-Vulgate translation
Yeah.
into Latin.
But even embrace education. I mean, that's an interesting rendering, especially when you consider that very much of Jewish religiosity is based upon
Mhm.
learning Torah and letting it transform you into, a more righteous and pure being, right? So that's an interesting divergence from kiss the son, right? Which is, I mean, preposterous. It makes no sense to begin with, but um, the LXX there is a pretty cool, even though it's different, it does hold an interesting meaning in light of how Judaism operates, right?
I think that particular understanding is reflected in the Targum Yonatan and the Vulgate
Sure.
as well. That's the
Mhm.
more common understanding. It's embraces, it makes perfect sense that you could understand nashku as embrace, because nashku is to draw close or to touch,
Yeah,
and as well as to kiss. Um, but education, I don't know how they get education out of a vowel. That
right.
just doesn't just doesn't fit with me. But that's how they translate it.
All right. Daniel 9:26. The Old Greek translates Mashiach correctly as Chrisma, anointing or ointment, not the personified Christos.
Yeah, you find this if you look in the older texts. There are, let me see if there are three words that I know of. There's theos, kurios, and Christos.
Hmm.
Those three words are abbreviated. Okay, so Christos would be chi ro, right?
Hmm.
And here you do not. If you look in those texts, it's written out charisma.
Yep.
Okay, so it's definitely they did. Whoever translated the LXX did not see the word anointed, the word Mashiach as meaning uh, uh, Messiah.
Right.
It's like right there, very obvious.
Yes. Isaiah 9:6 preserves the
Uh,
past tense of the Hebrew, a child was born, rather than a future prophecy.
And it also only includes um, a wonderful counselor. The other three the crown names are missing from the original documents, and you can see this, I think, in modern versions of the Septuagint. There'll be a star there, or they'll be in
Sure.
parentheses or something. They were just not there.
Right. Makes you wonder if that
Okay.
was done just out of like out of um stress on the wrist, right?
You know,
Yeah, but I mean, like
Isaiah's.
if the person writing it at the time knows this is about Hezekiah, then why waste the ink? You know what I
Well,
mean?
one thing that we have not brought up, and you find this a lot in Isaiah in particular, is uh, when the translator uh, did not know a word. Okay, there are cases where he will look for a similar sounding word in Greek
Hmm.
and use that word, even if it has absolutely no connection. And that's why, the quote from the Nets that it's unintelligible and clearly did not understand Hebrew. So you find that there's several of these kind of tricks that they
Yeah.
do. But that one is like a real shocker when I discovered that, because that's why Isaiah is such a challenge. Um, and these opinions of Isaiah as being the worst translated book.
What's interesting about Daniel is in that chart we looked at earlier about, being
Rewritten,
the
yeah.
fidelity rather rewritten all the way to literal, right?
Mhm.
Um, that means you would expect it in Daniel to
Yeah.
be, a bit less literal to the text, right? Yet you're
Mhm.
finding that here in 926, which is one of the most disputed chapters in all of Jewish versus Christian dialogue. You know,
Yeah, that's interesting.
that is interesting.
But certainly by the fourth century, we have that saying is chisma
Hmm.
and not Christos.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's actually a whole bunch of these things. Zechariah 12:10 um, says depending on who you're talking to, either they mocked me or danced triumphantly,
Yeah.
which indicates that that person was a bit dyslexic.
Yeah.
Okay, reading rakadu as reading dakaru, stabbed as rakadu,
Hmm.
danced. Um, there's a bunch of these. Isaiah 53 also. The Septuagint doesn't say dies for sins, but dies because of sins.
Right.
Okay, so there's a bunch of these that I think that in all honesty, if Christians were to do their homework, um, they would really distance themselves from this argument of using
Right.
the Septuagint.
Yeah. And interestingly, in
Well,
Daniel 9, you don't actually see Daniel 9 ever being used as an apologetic or a proof text in the New Testament.
Mm-hmm.
That's a more
Mm-hmm.
modern innovation. In fact, when
Yeah.
you do see Daniel 9 referenced by Jesus in the text, he's talking about the destruction of the temple,
Mm-hmm.
right? So it actually fits in with its Jewish understanding rather than this Christian one. Hilla, do you have something to add?
well, like Yossi says, I had something to add and it left me
Well, maybe
for
you'll get
another
it back.
brain, apparently.
Hilla, we're a lot older now than when we started this recording.
We
Yeah.
are. We definitely are.
All right. Origins hexapla. Correction
Very
versus
important.
recovery. The problem. The differences among the copies have become great, citing Origen on his commentary on Matthew 15. The methodology. Origen created a corrected form of the LXX, not a historical reconstruction. A critical example. Origen chose the reading Parthenos over Neanis, young woman, despite three other translations, as Yossi mentioned, Aquila, Symmachus, and Theodotion, using Neanis and only one using Parthenos. Origen did not reconstruct the original Septuagint. He created a corrected form of it, citing Emmanuel Tove. So on the right there is a conceptual diagram of Origen's hexapla structure. The Hebrew text is the first column. The Greek transliteration is the second. Third is Aquila. Four is Symmachus. Five is the LXX. And six is Theodotion.
Okay. So what was that LXX? Is that LXX of Isaiah? For what I understand, was something called the Old Greek.
Okay.
Okay, and that's an earlier translation. Um, the consensus, again, this is dating back to the third century, third century BCE, which is when the time when Parthenos did not mean virgin
Sure.
necessarily.
Right,
Okay,
right.
but by Origen's time, it certainly meant virgin.
Definitely.
Uh, the especially you take you look at Aquila. Aquila's translation is generally considered a bad one because it's like a word for word translation, and the Vulgate was Jerome, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, so
Mhm.
he used Aquila's translation to learn Hebrew.
Hmm.
Okay, because it was
Interesting.
such a word to word kind of thing. Um, so if you have that translation, it's known as a word to word. By the way, it mentioned what the positive thing that was said in the Talmud, Maya Fita, right? It says that how fair you were, or something about
Yes.
the
Yes.
rabbi said about that's a play on words, um, because what's the word? Oh, I'm sorry. Um, Basically, it's a reference that he was a convert,
Hmm.
and it was a play on words from because he was from Yefet.
Oh,
So
interesting.
they use the term Mayafit, okay, how fair this is.
Hmm.
And Yefet is the forerunner of
Greece.
Greece.
Yeah. Interesting. But yes, this is definitely a eye opener on Christian stewardship
Mhm.
and how Origen himself was, willing to make the necessary corrections to make his Christian document, his hexapla, right? Um, I think we need to definitely maintain this in mind when we approach the argument of the Septuagint. For example, we do have Aquila, Symmachus, and Theodotion, as mentioned, did not render Alma as Parthenos, right?
Mhm.
So if those, if Aquila is understood to be word for word, then at best, Origin is being interpretive, right?
Yeah, yeah. He's choosing. I would say that here I'm going to come up. Rabbi Tovia Singer, Kvodarav Singer, is always saying that this is a Christian document. Okay,
Hmm.
and I think what will be discussed is that most of the text is Jewish, but here we have a distinct case where, yeah, this appears to be a Christian choice.
Right.
Okay, even though the translation was a Jewish one,
Hmm.
he chose. It appears that he chose the translation that fit his theology
Yep.
at the time.
All right. And here's a little graph of the Greek versions and their ages.
Mhm.
And there's that rabbinic endorsement on the right there, Yossi.
Oh, there you go.
So the Old Greek dates back to, at
By
least the
the way,
third.
here you go. See what gets lost in the translation? Maya feet, you are fairer. Okay,
Hmm.
you
You
would
don't even see
you
the
would
play on
see
words,
you
right?
don't see the play on words.
Yep. All right. The landscape of Greek versions. So you have the Old Greek dating back to at least, the third century BCE. Theodotion, second century to first century BCE. Aquila, second century CE. Symmachus, late second century CE, and Proto-Lucianic, third to fourth century CE.
Yeah, and I think that Proto-Lucianic is something that scholars talk about, and they're not sure exactly what it is. I don't think there's any copies of it, but maybe it's something akin to the Q text or something.
Maybe.
Yeah. Okay.
Transmission and modification. Most changes were scribal and incremental, not deliberate falsifications. That's a quote from Tove. Christological harmonization is smoothing texts to align with Christian theology. Psalm numbering shifts the ordering of the Psalms. Isaiah smoothing attempts to fix Isaiah's difficult style, which was not conducive to direct translation.
There you go.
Canonical ordering, relocating books to fit a historical timeline rather than the Jewish Tanakh structure. Pretty
Yeah.
self-explanatory stuff.
I think the only thing to add is I think that we have to check. I think there's one more psalm. And the psalm numbering there is definitely see a shift
Hmm.
in -1 or +1. I don't remember exactly,
Right,
but
right.
anytime you look at the LXX, it's like, oh, okay, that's chapter 21
Hmm.
and not 22. Or
Right, right. Linguistic archaeology, the Jewish substratum. Hebraisms are transliterated words that hold no meaning to a Greek reader without Jewish context.
correct.
Greek, for example, Sabbaton, Hebrew meaning from Shabbaton or Sabbath. Greek, Pascha, Hebrew meaning from Pesach or Passover. Greek, Sadukaoi, Hebrew meaning from Sadokim, the followers of Sadok. Greek, Pharisaios, Hebrew meaning from Perushim, those who explain or separate, the Pharisees. Conclusion: the Torah and prophets remain overwhelmingly Jewish translations in origin.
Yeah, this is extremely important, and there's a lot of these Hebraisms you know, if you're a Greek person and you're going to be a Christian, you're going to be translating is something you don't understand. It does not come from your culture. Okay, so this is just a semaphore saying, hey, Jews had a hand in this.
Right, sure. And the conclusion, the historical witness. The Septuagint is neither a 100% Christian corruption nor a perfect Jewish artifact, but a historical witness to a world in which the translations of Scripture itself was still fluid. I think that's a pretty good way to sum it up.
Yeah, actually, translations even today are fluid.
That's what I was
I,
about to say. Exactly.
sorry,
Hmm.
I think this. I don't remember where I read this, but uh, in order to get a copyright on a new English translation, a new translation of the Bible, there's like a certain percentage of words that you have to change.
Interesting.
Okay. Yeah. So it's like if it's something like 20%, if I don't know exactly what the number is, but it's a certain number. It's you can take the exact same translation and change this particular number of words, and then you're able to get a copyright.
Hmm.
Um, you
Wow.
know, just saying.
I'm gonna go out and do that right now. I'm gonna go change a few
Oh,
words in
I
Well,
don't
the
trust you
it
to
just
do
makes you wonder
JPS.
if, even then, if bringing out a new, novel translation was something prestigious,
You
right?
know,
Because
I
you have so many Greek manuscripts floating around of the Nach that are so different and interpretive,
Mhm.
right? Was it a lucrative business then too to bring out
it's
your
always
own
lucrative.
rendering?
It's always lucrative to education if you're gonna because education was typically for the wealthy. So, you know, so yeah, it was a but I want to say about translations in general, I feel bad for the Christian who's sitting at their desk trying to study the Bible and they've got 14 different Bibles open, trying to understand what one word means when they could
Hmm.
just learn Hebrew or Greek and have one dictionary. I really do think that if people are curious about understanding what's being said better, then the only way they're really going to accomplish that is to give themselves agency in the idea that they are going to teach themselves the language and be able to understand it. Because even if you don't have a perfect understanding of Hebrew or Greek or whatever language you like, at the very least you'll be able to see oddities and questions arise because you look at something and
Right.
go, wait a second, that shouldn't be written like that.
Yeah.
And if you don't have that ability, then it doesn't matter how many different translations you look at. It'll always be a mysterious and locked document for you.
Hmm.
Yeah, you're letting somebody else think for you, essentially.
Right.
And
Right.
I would bring up that there was a time in American universities, and we can see this in Yale, you can see it in Cornell, Rutgers, their university newspapers called the Targum, that Hebrew was a required course.
Hmm.
Okay, it was a required course, and
Is it
right, it says Urim,
Harvard's like coat of arms has Hebrew in it?
is it Yale or Harvard? It says Urim and Tumim.
It's pretty
Urim
sure it's Harvard.
Vitumim. Yeah, and Cornell, the original, also has Hebrew on it. The original Cornell emblem. To now, it probably has something in Arabic, um,
It says
probably
in
from
Arabic, We have a new baby center.
No, I say right
Genius
away.
for children.
No, that's a Somalian. It says
That's a Somalianism. That's
Oh,
true.
it's
goodness
probably they
gracious.
probably take something from the Hamas charter. I want to know,
Right.
Hillel, what are you going to call your translation? The HDS or the HDV Hillel's
Right.
dastardly version or something.
That's right. Something like that. That's right. Right.
Okay, very good. This has been interesting.
Yeah. Yes, I think we definitely uncovered some interesting facts about the Septuagint. I think we delved into it pretty well. And I think anyone who watches this will have a better understanding of what the Septuagint is and not just toss around, well, the New Testament quotes the Septuagint. Okay,
Yeah,
like, so what? You know what I mean? Like, think about what
Yeah.
you're saying. You know what I mean? And I think it'll work on the other side of the spectrum too, to not just necessarily say, oh, well, that's a Christian document. We shouldn't even look at it.
yeah.
You know, um,
No,
two
it's
sides to every
something that we
story,
can use.
right?
Yeah, something we can use as a tool. Um, it's always interesting to to learn a new language.
Hmm.
Okay, as I said, I can read it. I can read it, and I can understand here and there. I'm not anywhere near as you are, but it you're not losing out by reading it, by learning learning a new
Sure,
language.
sure. Yes, and next time we will hyper focus on this Parthenos issue.
Oh
Uh,
boy,
we didn't really want to get too deep into that this time because this video would be 3 hours long. So we
yeah.
decided to give it its own due time and explain it adequately. Um, Hillel, Yossi, do either of you have any, closing remarks? Anything else to add?
I would like to. I know things that I would like to do in future sessions. I think it would be now we've done the Septuagint. It would be great to do the Masoretic text,
Hmm.
Yeah.
and I would prompt our listeners to give us suggestions.
Yes, definitely.
Well, as Masoretic text, DSS, Proto-Masoretic, it would be good to have sort of that whole thing because that's sort of a unknown area
Hmm.
that most people aren't even aware of. They don't really understand any of that. So
Right.
all those are good subjects.
Yes, because a
Um,
lot of people just throw out, oh, well, the DSS and the MT disagree without even actually knowing what they are, right?
well,
What's
most
different,
people,
what the innovations are, conventionally, what they're
Mhm,
even saying,
mhm.
right? So I think
yeah,
those would
most
be
people
good
do is
things to definitely delve into.
they pick up their phone and speak into it. Chat GPT,
Hmm.
explain the Bible to me, right? And I think that's what a lot. And unfortunately, and I say that half jokingly, but I've watched it on YouTube videos to
Hmm.
where people will retreat into consulting their AI rather than doing the work for themselves.
Sure.
And what they don't realize, and we were having this trouble with some of the slides tonight, right? Some of the
Hmm.
slides we were creating AI imagery for them, and we found that they didn't match what we had put in the notes.
Right.
Uh, every time you remove yourself from the direct process of learning, the more you trust someone else to tell you what to think. And if you're a person who does not want to be told what to think, but wants to understand, especially what God wants you to understand, then this is something that you've got to be willing to learn.
Yeah.
Having 14 Bibles in front of you is not going to help you. Uh, reading English only is not going to help you. It really depends on your dedication and what you're really hoping to get out of a study of the Word of God.
Hmm. Absolutely.
Yeah,
Well, all right,
very good.
everyone. I think that's a good place to end. Um, Look forward to hearing from you about possible topics in the future. Stay on the lookout for our next episode on Parthenos and Alma in Isaiah
And stay
7:14.
warm.
And stay warm. Yes, definitely. It's cold out here in the US right now.
Oh, it was
Not in
beautiful
Israel.
here. It was beautiful these
It's
last
very
couple of days.
nice.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's very nice. Although I would love to see some snow. I've seen snow in over 10 years at this point. So,
Oh, I haven't seen it in like 20 some, and I'm don't miss it a bit.
Well, I shoveled 6 times in the last 2 days, so I can show you all that you like.
Okay.
But all
Yeah.
right,
It was
everybody.
funny. I remember when it does snow, it snows here. It does snow in the Chilmon,
Right.
way up in the north, but in Yerushalayim, when it snows, people will drive from Tel Aviv and put snow on their cars and drive back to show the people in Tel Aviv. Yeah.
Interesting. That's cool. That's cool. There's plenty
Okay.
here. If they want some, I'll mail it over to them.
Okay.
But all right,
Very good.
everybody. This was the
Thanks.
Exodus Project. Hillel, Yossi. We'll see you next time, everybody.
See you
See you
next time.
later.